We're going to close today with a panel discussion of legislators. We heard from senior leaders earlier, but a lot of the debate and the representation of voices across Minnesota are held in the House and the Senate. And so no better way to kind of close out our morning than to hear what's on their minds as they listen to those who voted them into office and as they think about innovative solutions going forward in our community and in our state. I invite all the legislators and our moderator to the panel and to the stage, and I will just acknowledge those who volunteered to join us today and thank them. It includes Senator Justin Eichorn, who's on the E12 Finance Committee, I think. Policy Committee, thank you, Policy and Finance. We're going to talk education, though. And Senator Susan Kent, Representative Jenifer Loon, and Representative Erin Maye Quade. Please welcome our legislators to the stage. And I'm going to turn over the moderation to someone who really does not need an introduction, and that is editor and editorial writer for the Star Tribune, and that's Lori Sturdevant. What a great champion for so many issues we care about in our state, and a great thought leader. Please welcome Lori to the podium. There you are.
Well, thank you, Frank, and good morning, everybody. We have just a terrific panel here and a short time to talk about these important issues, so let's get right to it. This is where we get to bring the conversation we've been having this morning up the hill to where it counts at the state capitol, where Minnesotans have been bringing their dreams for a long time. And let's start with early education, because that has been such a touchy issue at the Capitol for several years. And let me pick on the veteran on our panel, and that would be Representative Jenifer Loon. She's starting her 5th term, as I recall, at the Capitol, and has a pretty major responsibility as head of the Policy Committee in the House on education funding. Representative Loon, we've been tussling for some years now about whether the approach to early education should be toward individual scholarships, means-tested scholarships, or something more universal through school districts for 4-year-olds. Where are we now on that issue?
Well, I think where we are now is that we're doing all of those things. We have a mixed delivery, a very robust mixed delivery approach to how we provide quality early childhood education in Minnesota, and a system that we have been growing, I think, quite rapidly. I was just reflecting on writing a few notes here on where we were just a few years ago. My 2nd term in office in 2011, I carried, for those of you who remember the Minnesota Early Learning Foundation, the MELF bill, to try to take what they had learned when they did their pilot program, and they had a significant amount of private funding from the business community to test scholarships in quality programs and the impact on students and how they were able to get them ready for kindergarten. I took that bill. We didn't get the results I was hoping for. I think we got $4 million, kind of a meager attempt at a scholarship fund. And today we're at, just rounding figures, about $120 million of the biennium, only in scholarships, just in that one fund. It's a huge step forward. Yes, you should clap. And that's due to the hard work of a lot of people in this room and others that are committed to doing that. So we now have, I was pleased to come in and began chairing the Education Finance Committee last session, so the last budget biennium, the current budget that we have, we put together. We more than doubled the money we put into school readiness, which is school preschool programs that we've had for a number of years. We pretty well doubled the scholarship money. We put significant new investments into Head Start. We've got robust money in ECFE. If you add everything together, and North Side Achievement Zone, St. Paul Promise Neighborhoods, Parent Aware funding, we're well over $300 million just in early childhood funding. So great strides forward, and I think what we're doing is we're looking at not one program suits the needs of all families and all early learners, and we're trying to provide that, again, broad range of choices so that we can meet families where they are and what they need for their young children.
And is there an appetite in your House Majority Caucus for increasing that share of the state budget that goes to early ed as the governor is proposing?
Yes, there is. And again, obviously, we're all anxiously awaiting the budget forecast and budget targets in that. But I think you'll see significant support. And one thing I would add is that, we've got, in addition to the education committees, you also have a dedicated subcommittee looking at the needs of childcare in the state of Minnesota. And there's some interactions between the programs that we have and maybe others in Health and Human Services and that, because we do have a significant problem with lack of affordable or available childcare in many areas of Minnesota. And so these are topics that I think you will find a great deal of bipartisan support in how we move forward with solutions to address those concerns.
Okay, well, Senator Susan Kent, it's your second term. First term you were in the majority, this term in the minority. It's a pretty tight minority with 34-33 being the count in the Senate. How do you see this issue this year? Are we going to press forward on multiple fronts, or will there be a change in direction?
Well, didn't bring my crystal ball, so I'm not exactly sure how this
You
is
can talk about your preferences if
I
you'd rather,
certainly can
rather
do
than
that.
your predictions.
Well, and I think it's important, and I appreciate Representative Loon's discussion, because I think my reactions are very similar. I think there is some energy to try to make this either or kind of a conversation specifically when we talk about early learning. And I think our great diverse state and our communities and our families need and want alternatives. And, I'm really excited to have supported both scholarships over the past 4 years and also expansion of the school readiness program that works for our school districts, because we know they need it too to provide those opportunities for kids. So the thing that I think about, we had a hearing focused on early learning a couple of years ago during interim, and I remember looking around the room. It was one of those sort of pinch me moments, because I just realized everybody in that room was so passionately committed to our youngest kids, because we know how important it is that they get off to a good start so that they can succeed long term. And I remember it was like one of those moments where we realized there's no longer a debate about whether or not we should do this. We're just talking about how we approach it and how we do it. And so I just think that's going to continue to frame the conversation for the rest of this session, and I'm excited that we'll continue to take care of our youngest learners.
Well, let me introduce our freshman senator and freshman representative. I don't want to pick on the freshmen by having them get too deep in the policy weeds here, but Senator Eichorn and Representative Maye Quade, maybe I should ask you to describe what you have heard from your constituents on the campaign trail about their desires for the state to participate in early education more fully. Is that something you heard about a good deal as you ran for office last year?
I'll start here just a second. I'm Justin Eichorn, and I'm going to correct the sheet here. It says I'm the E12 Finance Committee Vice Chair. I'm the Vice Chair of the Policy Committee, but I also sit on the Finance Committee. I have 4 young children, ages 2, 4, 6, and 8, so I'm right in the middle of what we're talking about right now. So I'm living it firsthand, and these were 2 committees I requested to be on because it is so important. As far as the campaign trail, as I'm sure you're aware, healthcare really dominated the campaign trail. So unfortunately, education took a back burner to that. But I have been taking some time talking to people who are actually in the classroom, been trying to reach out to teachers. In fact, this afternoon I'm going to talk with another elementary school because it's important to know what the teachers are thinking. But on the early ed side, I like the approach that Representative Loon talked about, a mixed approach. There's not a one-size-fits-all. Being in the public school system and the pre-K side isn't going to work for every child, and being in a private type situation is going to work for every child. So that mixed delivery approach, I think, is a really good approach. The scholarships are great, and it gives parents some choice. As we all know, education really starts at home. And, again, I live that every day. I see that you got to start early, and we realize how important it is. It was also mentioned that there's a subcommittee in the House. There's actually a working group in the Senate that the public is invited to attend on Thursday mornings. That it's kind of a working group for 0 to 5 age group, and we want to see if there's other areas we can improve or things we can do different, because that 0 to 5 age range is so important, for brain development and for their educational experiences going forward. So I'm really excited to be working on that group as well.
And Representative Maye Quade, what about in your Apple Valley district? What did you hear about this issue?
Yeah, so thank you all so much for having me here today. When I was knocking doors and talking to folks in my district, I think one of the biggest things that I was made aware of is that resources aren't always getting to the families who need it the most. And a lot of times it's that breakdown between things that are available and folks knowing that it's available. And so as a freshman representative, I spend a lot of time making sure that people know what's available to them now, making sure that they know scholarships are available, connecting schools with folks that I knocked on the doors that they have young children, they would absolutely qualify for some of these scholarships, that would love to send their kids to early learning opportunities and just didn't know that they were able to do it. And that often falls into our low income areas and our students of color and some of our immigrant families that are new to the district. And so making sure that I'm connecting my constituents with what's already, what's already available. And then the working group is actually really interesting because it's looking at all of the funding sources that we have that are going to this 0 to 5 age range and seeing if we can target it and streamline it to make sure that the goals are all the same. So the work that's going on in the legislature is really wonderful, and I want to make sure that it's connected to the constituents that I have in my district.
Well, keep the microphone there handy, because you just talked a lot about targeting, and that sounds like scholarships in the lingo of this issue at the legislature. But the governor has not proposed an increase in scholarship funding. He's saying stay the course on scholarship funding and put significant new money into the voluntary grant program for school districts to offer preschool programs of their own, and into a program that's been sort of a forgotten stepchild, if I could use that metaphor, the basic sliding fee child care subsidy, which was cut drastically in 2003 and has never really rebounded from that. As you think about this tussle between scholarships and other approaches, Representative Maye Quade, where do you come down?
Well, you can never overlook the fact that local school districts are going to know the students and the folks in their district better than we will sitting at the state legislature. And so I really do applaud the governor's approach to that. I think choice is always really important, but we have to remember not everybody has choices about where they send their kids to early learning. And so making sure that our districts, and we give that power back to our districts and our teachers who really know the students that they're educating and some of the issues that are coming through. I think that's really important, and I think it's good to recognize the strength of our districts and give them that opportunity. So that's where I would come down on it, and I'm really excited about the governor's budget proposals for all of education.
Well, Senator Eichorn, you're a Republican. I have a feeling you might have a slightly different take. What did you think of the governor's ideas?
Well, I can agree with her to some degree, and I think his heart is in the right place, but I come from a rural area, and when we look at our rural school districts, when we start adding, additional programs, a lot of our schools are real pressed for space. Our tax base is low. I mean, only 40% of our land is taxable because there's so much state and federal lands. So when you put those kind of requirements on school districts, it makes it hard for them to add additional facilities. It gets expensive for the tax base and for the school, and sometimes they have a hard time adapting to that. With that said, I agree with Representative Maye Quade here that the school districts certainly need to be part of the equation. We can't underscore that enough. But the scholarships are also an important piece. I would have liked to see some more funding go to the scholarships instead. Again, because it's going to be beneficial for some of the rural school districts that don't have that tax base, and it gives the parents some choice. Again, back to the point that I had before that, all learning starts at home, and those parents really know the best fit for the child, and that best fit might be the school district, but it might be another option if it is available. So I do like the scholarship model as well, and I think we need to continue with that blended model going forward, just because of the varying, types of districts and types of population, and there's so many aspects that go into it that I think we need to be. I would have really liked to see the governor do more for the scholarship side of it.
Well, let's just clarify that the governor's proposal is for voluntary programs at
Right.
school districts, not a requirement. That's a change for him. He was talking about a requirement just a couple of years ago, and he's kind of backed off that position. I think partly because of the urging of the Senate DFL caucus, he backed off that position, right, Senator Kent?
That's exactly right. That, what we were hearing, there was a lot of interest from school districts to begin to build these programs, but particularly having just implemented all-day kindergarten throughout the state, that was seen as a very big step to take immediately thereafter from a facilities perspective. So by doing it this way, by going through school readiness, it is a way of sort of easing into expanding the program. And to Senator Eichorn's point, one of the challenges that we keep hearing about from Greater Minnesota is that many families aren't able to take advantage of the scholarships because there aren't enough qualifying programs in those smaller and more remote communities. And so, again, that is why it is so important that we make sure that we have something that is potentially available through the school districts if the school districts feel that it is right for them and their communities.
What do you think of that? Is there a particular need in Greater Minnesota for help for schools to become providers in this realm, Representative Loon?
Well, there may be, and we've had some really interesting testimony before the committee this year, and I'll give you two different perspectives. One was from a provider who was providing sort of what we call wraparound service for 4-year-olds in their community for a school district that had a voluntary preschool program and 4-year-olds, and they alternated 2 days a week. One group of 4-year-olds would go, and 2 other days a week, the second group of 4-year-olds would go, and this daycare provider would provide their wraparound service. The school district received one of the pilot grants and then went to a 4-day-a-week program, and the result that happened was that wraparound service now could not provide service for all of those families on the same days, and they had to push 6 families out of care that they couldn't cover for them. And there's a real lack of service in that community. So I think, first of all, with the voluntary preschool pilot that we're on, more coordination between the school districts and their local providers, because again, in most cases, these aren't full-day programs, or at least not enough for parents working full-time, that they're going to need something either before or after the school-based program is over, and where the kids are going to go and who's going to provide that, and is there a way to coordinate that so that everybody's covered in the way that they need to be. And the second thing is, are we also looking at the services we're providing to kids, and are we serving new kids through those programs? That is one of the questions we asked of the commissioner. There's 3,300 children being served under the universal or the voluntary preschool program, but we don't know necessarily if they're kids who weren't being served by a scholarship or something else. So again, with scarce resources and a lot of need out there, we want to make sure that we're providing help to as many families as we can who need it, and that we're being thoughtful about how we put these programs together. We do allow people to braid resources, but again, we know that about 22% of the families that are in the voluntary preschool pilot would not qualify. They're not of the income level. They're above the income level to qualify for perhaps scholarship or something. So these are tough questions we're going to need to take a look at.
Well, indeed they are. And I wonder specifically what you think about the governor's calling attention to the CCAP program, which I still call basic sliding fee, the old program that is an income-tested program that was the one I alluded to a moment ago that got cut rather drastically in 2003 when the state was in a deep crisis financially and never really rebounded. The governor's proposing putting $85 million in the next 2 years into that program. What do you think about that program? Where does it fit in this modern scheme we've created?
I think it fits very well, and one of the initiatives I'm going to be looking at, and I'm hoping to come out with a bill on it, still working on the idea, but is perhaps with all of these streams of new programs that we're creating and enhancing, if we maybe could do a better job of coordinating. We've got a scholarship program. Now it's targeted to 3- and 4-year-olds, operated through the Department of Education, but we do allow siblings from 0 to 3 to get a scholarship if they have a 3- or 4-year-old who is. So about 12% of our education scholarship funds are going to children under the age of 3. Families can braid those funds, but are we doing a good job of looking at the waiting list for CCAP and matching that up with scholarship availabilities in our areas? Are there economies of scale we could get by combining the administrative functions, so not necessarily having the Department of Education and Health and Human Services both operating and duplicating administrative services? So sort of some big ideas there to look at, but again, with the goal of making sure that we can serve as many families and children as possible with the resources we're able to pull together.
I want to get the two senators involved in this, especially Senator Eichorn, because he represents a rural district where we've been hearing about child care deserts, places in rural Minnesota where there aren't enough providers. Would increasing CCAP, the Basic Sliding Fee Program, make a difference in your area, Senator Eichorn?
It might make some of a difference. I'm pretty fortunate, at least in part of my district, there are a lot of childcare options. It's just that it's so expensive. And that's what a lot of families are running into. So it's definitely important to see that, some increase to help, families with young children. But again, in my district, being rural, I'm very fortunate that we do have a lot of providers and are very fortunate in that aspect. That are certainly a lot of areas in the state that don't have that. And it's something I'm interested in, and I'm glad to see there is some more funding for it. But I'd like to take a little deeper look into it. But it's something I can definitely be supportive of.
Yeah. And Senator Kent, what's your impression about this problem with greater Minnesota having insufficient child care? Would an increase in basic sliding fee make a difference?
Excuse me. I am very much appreciative of the governor's including this in the budget, in his budget proposal. We've heard about this for years. It is a big need, and families are struggling, and this is something we can do to help. And I think it would, we've heard and seen evidence that some of these family care providers are just closing up shop in greater Minnesota, and that this might be the kind of thing that would provide an incentive for them to make it feasible for them to stay open, and that would be so important to families and their kids.
Okay. And I know Representative Maye Quade, you told me during your visit to the Star Tribune before the election that one of the reasons you were running was your concern about the changing population in your school district, the school district in which you grew up in Apple Valley. And that got me thinking about how we've been talking about the achievement gap and the difficulty that children in poverty have been experiencing throughout our state. And it happens in the suburbs as well. What's the picture in Apple Valley with regard to help for families affording child care?
Well, I think we all know that childcare is incredibly expensive, and it's one of the biggest barriers for people going back to work or working. If you can't afford childcare, then you can't go and have a job. And so I think, I sit on the Jobs Committee as well, and when I think of these, this money to help children go to childcare, I also look at it from a jobs perspective and a security for our economic future in Minnesota. And so I'm trying not to think of anything in a silo. I think it's very important that families can afford to send their kids to childcare, and that we can help them out and do that, whether it's greater Minnesota, the suburbs, or in the urban core.
Yeah, I have to echo the comments of Senator Kent a moment ago. It's refreshing to hear this much accord on an issue that has been, as recently as a few years ago, quite contentious at the legislature. I think it bodes well. You'll read some optimism in my column this Sunday about this legislative session. Well, before we get the hook here, let's talk a bit about the last panel that the superintendent just moderated so well, about that work-business connection. It's another point where I think there is a good deal of legislative agreement, and yet almost every year, things that have to do with higher education wind up getting the small share of the education pie, and people expressing a lot of regret about that. What can be done? What do you think the state ought to be doing in this realm of strengthening the school-to-work connection, our career preparation in Minnesota, at a time when the workforce shortage is becoming acute? Representative Loon, what do you think about that?
Well, it's a great question, and I just have to give a shout out to the students who were on the last panel.
Yes, weren't they
you
great?
were wonderful. What an inspiration. Every time we bring students before the committee, and I try to do it often, I have no question about the future of our state. We have such amazing young people, and they're great aspirations, and you're going to do wonderful things for the state of Minnesota. Thanks for being here. We can do a better job of making sure that we're providing students with information and ideas about their post-high school plans in high school. We've cut back over a number of years on exposure to careers, vocational, and other classes in our high schools, as well as planning for your post-secondary, whether it's a 2 or 4 year college degree or whatever your plans are. or aspirations might be. And I think we really need to go back and take a look at our investments in those areas. Working with the business community, maybe more internship opportunities for students while in high school. Some high schools have certificate programs, so if students want to go right from high school into some kind of a workforce situation, and maybe they're also doing some post-secondary schooling as well, and how we help children prepare for that. I'll just mention one other thing. We do have a number of ways for students to get college credits and take college classes in the high schools, but we've had some challenges recently. The Higher Learning Commission, which is a national accrediting organization that schools are min-state schools, or MinSCU as they were formerly called, are subject to. I've put some requirements on high school teachers teaching concurrent enrollment or college in the schools classes, having to have master's degrees in their content area, which some of our teachers do not have, that have been offering these classes, so students get college credit taking a course at their high school, have done for years. And so this is something that has saved Minnesota families millions of dollars. Students can get, in many cases, up to 2 years of college under their belts while they're in high school. We've got to continue providing options. Those PSEO, AP, IB classes, all of those things that provide additional exposure for students to college, to post-secondary options, to career options, so that we are getting you launched very firmly into those plans once you leave our high schools.
And are the school districts as friendly to some of those programs as they should be?
No, they're not.
And what can be done about that?
Well, some of them will be asked to come and testify before our committees and talking about that. And, I understand the struggles. I will say we do have to balance this, especially in, I think a lot of it's coming from some rural areas where maybe their enrollment in their schools could be significantly changed if they've got a lot of high schoolers that leave to do PSEO. So they actually go to college campuses and that money for that student follows them, and there's concerns about what it means for their funding, as well as sort of the composition of their student body. So, I don't mean to diminish those concerns, but again, the importance of providing exposure, especially for students who may not think that they're college bound, having the opportunity to take a college level class in high school. We know from the data, it boosts the confidence of those students. It greatly increases the chances that they are going to go on to get education after high school and do it successfully. So for so many reasons, these are really important programs to continue and to grow.
Yeah, and Senator Kent, I think, judging by the clock, you might be getting the last word here. The Senate DFL caucus did a lot of work in this area. I'm thinking especially about the pipeline program that Senator Terry Bonoff, no longer in the Senate, but how she championed that as head of the Senate's Higher Education Committee. Where do you see that work going? What's the opportunity for increasing this school to career connection this year?
So in the past 4 years, I had the opportunity to serve on both E12 committees in the Senate and the Higher Education and Workforce Development Committee. And so I got to do early learning all the way through lifelong learning. And it is so important that we not have gaps in between those sections. But I think it's important to know that we've done some really pretty exciting things. You referenced the pipeline program, which really is sort of an internship in partnership with businesses and some of the formerly known as MinSCU institutions. But the partnerships that have existed, I really commend Commissioner Cassellius and Poggemiller and their work with Chancellor Rosenstone and President Kaler. They have worked really hard together to talk about where are the gaps and where do we need to tighten those partnerships. And another thing that has been pretty exciting is watching the innovation coming out of our higher ed institutions in terms of their link with the business community. So, for example, I went to a meeting at Century College. They have an entire advisory panel that talks about, where the industries in the area are going, so that Century has the information they need to fine-tune their programming and the offerings to their students. The other one I would highlight, and this is in the governor's budget, is a wonderful program out of the U called MinDrive. And what it does is it identifies areas of where there is already good research infrastructure at the university, where you have good infrastructure within the Minnesota business community, and then you also have growth opportunities. And we initially funded 4 separate areas. He's asking for another one that would be research and development into cancer treatments. And so it's just so powerful what that does in terms of linking the education of our workforce with the jobs that we are creating down the line. It's just plain smart. And if I can put in one last little plug, an issue that I've worked on over the past 4 years is student support services, which is counselors, school psychologists, social workers, nurses. I was really grateful that we were able to, it's a matching program with the school districts, completely opt-in, but we were able to fund it significantly this past session, and the governor's put some additional funding in it, so we can hopefully do some more of those grants. The uptake from school districts was phenomenal. There's more interest than we had funds available. It's so important to help kids and advise them so that they can make good decisions about their pathway.
Well, clearly you can see that this is an area, this whole area we've been talking about all morning here, this is an area where there has been good bipartisan work done and a lot of interesting, innovative projects started. I'll just put an editorial writer's coda on our morning here, stealing the line from one of the earlier panelists. The bottom line is, fund it. Thank you.